Hey, 42 here. Millennials, stereotypically known for their avocados, blended breakfasts, oat milk, meditation, Pilates, yoga, and random bouts of veganism. Ostensibly, they appear to be paragons of health and wellness. There's a self-confidence amongst millennial culture that the way they are living is the optimum way to do so, and they would fully expect to stay healthier for longer into old age than their parents or grandparents. But now, millions of millennials around the world are beginning to reach their early to late 30s, a time when age-related issues can start to appear. So, for the first time, we can finally start to measure the early results of this large-scale millennial wellness experiment to see if it is showing signs of paying off. However, worryingly, new research has indicated that perhaps it hasn't, and that millennials may in fact be the least healthy generation of the past 100 years. Could it be the case that their parents and grandparents have lived healthier and happier lives than they will? Let's find out. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. Have you already played Raid Shadow Legends? If not, then right now is the time to start, because it's finally available for PC and Mac. Raid on PC has the same great core gameplay as the Android and iOS versions, but with a ton of extra graphical goodies. Seriously guys, it's amazing, especially the graphics. You have to check them out. But don't worry, you don't need a super powerful processor or badass gamer's computer to enjoy the game at speed and with amazing graphics. It runs super smoothly, and the install barely took me a few minutes. It's a cross-platform game, so you can install the game on your PC or Mac and then continue playing on your mobile device also. So basically you can play Raid anywhere. There are over 400 champions to collect and customize. So my favourite champion is probably this beefy guy because he looks like Santa with a sword, and he can freeze his enemies, which is super fun to play around with. I'm absolutely loving it so far, and I know you will too. Oh, and best of all, this game is free to download and play. You can start playing right now by hitting the link in the description. Make sure to use my link because you'll get 50,000 free silver and a free epic champion as part of the new player program. My in-game nickname is 40 and you can come join my clan today. Now, when I referred to millennials earlier, I chose the phrasing millennial culture intentionally. Whilst technically millennials are anyone born between 1982 and 2002, I don't think it's right to classify all these billions of young people as millennials. Millennials have carved out their own monotone, herd-like culture that is so easily defined it would be unfair and incorrect to say that every young person is a millennial. Thankfully, not every modern youth worships overpriced monitor stands, spends their days on Instagram and burns any cookbook that includes words such as steak or tasty. For regular people whose daily wellness routine consists of sniffing the milk to check it won't make you vomit if you pour it all over your Cheerios, some of the things millennials do to ostensibly improve their health can seem utterly bizarre. They drink charcoal, put turmeric in their lattes, and now they're beginning to eat insects and inject themselves with IVs. Yes, both of those are now millennial health fads that are about to explode. Millennials are increasingly buying cookies and other snacks with ground up crickets in them, and also baking with cricket flour. And yes, there is also a growing trend to get regular vitamin IV drops. Not when you're unwell, just because why the hell not? A 2019 study conducted by Blue Cross Blue Shield, a federation of 36 US health insurance companies, found that insects and avocados may be doing millennials a lot more harm than good. The study found that across the board, millennials consistently score worse for all types of health issues, psychological and physical, than the previous generation. The previous generation being Gen X, those born between the 1960s and 80s. Millennials' health stays at a reasonably high level during their early 20s and is in line with, but not necessarily better than, Gen X's quality of health between the ages of 20 to 26. So, whatever millennials are doing during their early 20s isn't necessarily helping them, but it's not harming them either. However, according to this comprehensive study, everything changes once they hit 27. Weirdly, 27 seems to be a cliff edge for millennials, where the quality of their overall health plummets into a mysterious abyss. It would be reasonable to assume that this decline in health is simply due to aging, but millennial health seems to worsen so severely after 27 that the drop far exceeds what any doctor would attribute to normal aging. And their health drops off significantly more so than it did for Generation X or baby boomers once they reach 27. There's something more going on here. Something to do with the unique lifestyle that millennials lead, which the previous generations didn't. Let's drill down into these worrying statistics a little further. This table shows the 10 most prevalent health conditions affecting millennials today between the ages of 21 and 36. In 2014, major depression affected just under 4% of millennials. Unfortunately, this isn't surprising. We have known for some time now that with young people, we are today facing the worst epidemic of depression and mental health issues in modern history. Between 2013 and 2016, diagnoses of depression amongst millennials rose by a staggering 47%. But what's interesting is that during the same period, depression diagnoses rose by 33% across the rest of the population too. For me, this just further qualifies the widely held suspicion that this increase is, at least somewhat, linked to social media. Because the entire population is increasingly using it, but millennials and the younger generations have integrated it the most into their lives. Looking again at these results, what is most alarming is the huge increase in diagnoses across the board in millennials as they age. As you can see, after aging just 3 years, this same group of people saw a 31% increase in major depression, 29% increase in hyperactivity, and 22% increase in type 2 diabetes. And this is something that has changed with time. It's not saying that globally these issues are affecting people more in 2017 than they were in 2014. This study followed people who were born during a specific year range. So these are, for statistics' sake, the very same people, just 3 years older, indicating a worrying health decline as millennials age. But all this means nothing without a control group to measure against. So, let's take a look at how millennials stack up against the preceding generation, the Gen Xers. This chart shows the prevalence per 100 people of the same health issues of Gen Xers aged 34 to 36 and millennials aged 34 to 36. The difference in years of the source data is so that both generations could be analysed when they were both the very same age, as age is the most critical factor to quality of health. As you can see, for every condition except alcohol use disorder and psychotic conditions, millennials showed much higher prevalence across the board than their elders, reaching as much as a 37% increase in prevalence for hyperactivity. What's interesting to me is that there is actually just a 3-year age gap between both these groups. The Gen Xers here were born just 3 years before the millennials, yet the health differences are so stark, which indicates that during the switchover when the world began producing millennials, something drastically changed, which meant that millennials were brought up in a very different cultural, technological, and social environment than those only 3 years earlier. One of the most alarming statistics for me, as can be seen here, is that at the very same age, millennials are 21% more likely to suffer from cardiovascular conditions than Gen Xers. That's a large increase in a very dangerous physical health condition. There's also a growing disparity between young men and young women. Women have always been diagnosed with depression, endocrine and thyroid issues at much higher rates than men, but amongst young people, the gender health gap is widening. One recent study from the CDC found that the rate of new diagnoses of type 2 diabetes rose much more sharply in females, 6.2%, than in males, 3.7%, ages 10 to 19. This is obviously looking at Generation Z, not Millennials, but there is shockingly almost double the increase in type 2 diabetes prevalence for young females than males. Why? Well, honestly, the researchers still haven't figured that one out yet. They're still looking into what may be the cause. And when it comes to millennials, Blue Cross Blue Shield found that overall, female millennials are 20% less healthy than their male counterparts. There's an important question to be answered here. Why is this happening? Why is millennial health so much worse than Generation X and baby boomers? And why does their health decline so dramatically when they hit 27? Well, there are two facets of health to discuss here, psychological and physical. Let's first discuss the psychological. As we have discussed, depression amongst millennials is at a record high. Also, they are dying from alcohol and drug overdoses at a higher rate than any previous generation. Psychologists believe there are two primary factors driving this dark trend. The first is money stress. Statistically, you are 3 times more likely to have a mental health disorder if you have unsecured debt. And unfortunately, millennials have more debt than any other generation. The average millennial has $28,000 of debt, excluding mortgages. At the same age, Gen X's had on average $13,000 of debt, less than half. And no, this is not because of student loans. In fact, student loans contribute a small amount to this average. The largest contributor to this debt is credit card bills, accounting for an average of 25% of this 28k debt. And I don't need to tell you that that's a fairly unhealthy type of debt. Yes, some millennials have done very, very well for themselves. The Zuckerberg tech startup crowd are generating immense amounts of new money. But those are a tiny fraction of millennials, less than 1 in a million. It's usually not their fault, but the vast majority of millennials are living in a gig economy. According to Pew Research, 2/3 of millennials live paycheck to paycheck, and only 38% feel financially stable. The reason behind this is a mix of a changing world and a faster, more harsh economy that can seem harder to crack than in the past for those who are just starting out in their careers. But also, millennials grew up with role models such as Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and others who started their billion-dollar companies from their bedrooms. This has instilled a mentality amongst millennials that every young person can become filthy rich just by creating an app or starting a new social network. The reality is that these are 1 in a billion rare occurrences that require a touch of genius, mixed with a heap of luck. Millennial expectations are well above the reality of the world that they live in, which has always required, still requires, and probably always will require endless graft with little praise, just to put food on the table. And today, you can still get ahead of everyone else and secure a well-paid job, but it requires just as much dedication and hard work as it always has done, which can sometimes come as a surprise to an Instagram generation who are used to the fake personas they see on social media every day, of a few people in Los Angeles who roll out of bed every morning into a pool of money because they invented a vegan milkshake that makes you shit £10 a week. And that brings me nicely onto the next reason for declining millennial mental health: social media. Now, I've talked about this extensively before, so I'll be brief. The fear of missing out that millennials experience on a daily basis from browsing social media, and the idea that someone out there is always leading a better life than themselves, has created a damaging culture of unfulfilled youth that always want and expect more from their own life, but may never get it. Instagram and other apps have indoctrinated us into a false idea of a lifestyle where every meal looks picture perfect, and we never work, We simply spend our days strolling through forests, surfing the waves in Miami, or taking selfies on top of a Norwegian mountain. Of course, this is all a show, and it's fake, a fraud. Even the people who regularly post that content do not live like that, I promise you. From prince to pauper, everyone's lives are reassuringly dull. Because Instagram and Facebook only shows everyone highlights, but beneath the charade there are always lows, even if you're a celebrity or a billionaire. In fact, often even more of them. Unfortunately though, many millennials have a tough time understanding why their own life doesn't live up to this manufactured Instagram lifestyle that they soak in every day, and so will always feel empty and unfulfilled. The mental health consequences of this attitude are disastrous and ultimately lead to depression. But what could be causing the steep decline in the physical health of millennials? Surely we can't blame increased diabetes and heart disease prevalence on social media too? Well, we probably could if we tried hard enough, but no, in all seriousness, researchers believe it's another millennial trend driving this physical health decline. Millennials cook much less often than previous generations. On average, millennials cook 2 fewer evening meals per week than baby boomers. They also choose ready meals 20% of the time compared to just 5% for baby boomers. Also, millennials buy far fewer groceries than boomers and Gen Xers, and they eat out a lot more, or increasingly, get deliveries from companies such as Deliveroo and Uber Eats. Ready meals, deliveries, and eating out are just nowhere near as healthy and nutritious as home-cooked meals. That's just a fact, unless your average midweek home-cooked meal consists of deep-fried lard. Millennials also eat much more junk food and processed food than the previous generations. Add on the fact that technology means young people are staying in more than ever before in history. We're socializing nowhere near as much as we used to. No, social media is not socializing, and are thus getting less exercise. All this together means that millennials are now the most obese generation in history. Based on current projections, 70% of millennials will be overweight or obese by the time they hit their 30s. Compared to 50% of baby boomers when they were the same age. And so this would at least partially explain the huge increase in physical health conditions when millennials reach their late 20s, usually beginning at 27 because that's when the metabolism starts to slow down, and so their bad eating habits catch up with them and the weight suddenly piles on. The eating habits of young people have changed more so over the past decade than ever before in the previous 50 years. We are coming to the end of an experiment that will ultimately determine whether hundreds of fad diets, food trends, and food group exclusions can really be healthier than the time-tested traditional food archetype of meat, veg, and potatoes, or some variant. We are only at the beginning of seeing the results of this global experiment, and so far, those results are less than promising. So let us see what the following decades bring. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to subscribe and don't forget to check out the sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends, by using my unique link in the video description.